Assisting me in the opining, my, if you will, Titans of Tumult, Amy Ridenauer, chairman of the National Center for Public Policy Research. Amy, good to have you back.
Well, thank you, Alan, and it's good to be talking facts. It's not so common.
Thank you very much. On board as well, Robert Weiner, Democratic strategist, columnist, and former communications director for Clinton Drug Czar General Barry McCaffrey. He's also former communications director for Congressman Rangel and Conyers of New York and Michigan, respectively. Actually, Bob's been in politics since the Japanese surrendered after World War II. Bob, good to have you back.
Yeah, speaking of facts, and speaking of masters of delusion, Stockman, who tripled the debt under Reagan without a financial crash.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean he's wrong about this.
All by himself. Tip O'Neill didn't help at all.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know. Whenever you're faced with a fact that's very troublesome, you have to start undercutting the credibility of the person who's presenting that fact, even though the two aren't necessarily connected. I got a secret for you. A good guy and a bad guy can both say the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and guess what? Just because the bad guy said it doesn't diminish it as a fact. But let me catch people up and encapsulate, and I'll go right to you on this one, Amy. The biggest criticism that we're hearing from the administration over Congress using the debt ceiling hike as leverage to restrain spending is that it's illegal to renege on our debt. But I've been looking at this and yakking on this now for a couple of months. The reality is interest on the debt equals about 6% of our budget. And the $2.5 trillion that we actually rake in each year would more than cover that 6%, thus really making the charge of reneging on the debt completely bogus. So why are Democrats arguing that which is so easily impeachable? Amy Ridenauer.
Sadly, we have a dishonest president that he has concluded that he can be dishonest, and people will fall for it. We go back to last year when they were fighting over the budget at that time, when he told the Republicans in the closed-door meetings that he didn't actually have to negotiate. As long as he gave speeches talking about how he was negotiating, he would be covered with the American public. So that's the sincerity of that guy. But I would point out two things about the debt ceiling. The first, the one you just said. We have far more money than we need to meet all those obligations just from what comes in automatically. We don't need to raise the debt ceiling. And the second thing, and I don't think the president should get away with this particular lie either. He said last week that Social Security checks will not necessarily go out if we don't raise the debt ceiling. That is false on three counts. First of all, it's actually well, 4 counts because we don't use checks anymore. They send them to your bank automatically. But forget that. The Full Faith and Credit Act was passed by the House of Representatives that says even without a debt ceiling increase, if we have to raise it to pay Social Security, we will. Now, the Senate hasn't voted, but Harry Reid could any time. Secondly, there's such a thing as the Social Security Trust Fund. Now, it's not as full as it ought to be, and it's on paper. But, of course, we're talking about paper here. They could do what they did in 1985 and cash some of it in. And then, finally, we have enough money to do it. So that was a lie. If you are on Social Security and you're hearing this, don't worry about the debt ceiling debate and you getting your payments. You will get your payments either way. The real question is, 20 years from now, will people get their payments if we don't do something about overspending and soon?
Bob Weiner.
Wow, we're going to have a matter of agreement here, and there are some Republicans that agree with Amy on this. The Social Security Trust Fund does allow the funding. Boehner was so dead wrong on the Sunday shows when he said there's no money in Social Security because Amy is exactly right. There's
hold up, but Treasurer Jack Lew said the same thing.
My point. There's $2 trillion in the Social Security Trust Fund. It is funded because of the Pepper-Tip O'Neill deal for 30 years, and only then it just drops about 25% and can be
they're all IOUs.
With a tweak of the
But they're all IOUs.
Yeah, just like your bank. Just like your
they're
bank
all
account
IOUs, though.
Just like
they're
your
fake.
bank
But it used to
is,
have money. It used to have money. Now it doesn't. That change cannot be erased by you saying just like your bank. Jack Lew made it abundantly clear when he was head of OMB during the Clinton administration that there are, and I quote, no real assets that you can draw down upon, unquote. He said that. Jack Lew said that it's not real. He said it's not real money.
Seniors have paid in. Is that right?
What do you say about Jack Lew? What do you say about Jack Lew? Jack Lew, Lew. Jack Lew. What do you say about Jack Lew disagreeing with what you're stating right now, although now he's flipped around and he's come back to the other side? But he made it abundantly clear during the Clinton administration that what we have in the way of IOUs are things from which you can draw down upon. which means that where there once was cash, there now is none.
But it's more than an IOU because it's what seniors actually paid in. It's not the government just saying,
as long as you're acknowledging that it's no longer the cash it was. As long as you're acknowledging that it's no longer the cash it was. But Bob, let me ask you this.
It's a government commitment. That counts.
Commitment, thank you. But you will acknowledge before it was cash. Now it's commitment.
Well,
you know what?
Real cash that seniors
I'd rather go out Saturday night.
Thrown out the window?
I'd rather go out Saturday night with cash. I'd rather go out Saturday night with cash than a commitment. I'm sorry.
Saturday night, and I ain't got no money.
All I have are Jack Lou's IOUs. Anyway, let me emphasize this a little differently about the full faith and credit thing. We take in about 200. And Bob, I'm going to stick with you. We take in about $200 billion a month, while only $30 billion a month is necessary to avoid reneging on our full faith and credit. Given that fact crushes the claim that we need to raise the debt ceiling in order to maintain our full faith and credit, why do virtually all Democrats keep making the same claim?
Well, I don't disagree that we're taking in a lot of tax money with a lot of less benefits because under sequestration we've actually cut the government to such an extent that the debt is falling the most it has in 50 years. We have half the debt now than Obama when he first came in.
Happy to hear all that, but why the false claim? Why assert that which is academically easily disproven? Why do that?
Well, Obama's making the point that the debt has fallen in half, but nobody wants to hear it. They want to just say we got this big crisis on debt. The problem
I'm saying the president cannot on one hand say that if we don't lift the debt ceiling, we're going to endanger the full faith and credit of the United States, when on the other hand, we have more than enough money coming in to take care of that. $30 billion is all we need to take care of the interest on the debt. If we take care of interest on the debt, that takes care of all the global markets people are concerned about. And as far as all the other bills...
All the global markets people are concerned about. What about the bills for the things that the Congress obligated and the money for things like cancer treatment at NIH? And
lots of prioritizing is always done anyway. Don't forget, lots of prioritizing is always done anyway. How many bills do you think got less money? How many bills throughout the year do you think consistently would get less money than originally intended because of that very prioritizing reality?
Pay, but once you're obligated, you have to pay.
Every year is Alan Nathan, the militant moderate. Once again, this is the oasis for those who have an aversion to the left, right, black, white, two-dimensional approach. And you were listening to, Secretary Jack Lew, making more excuses with Candy Crowley of CNN. Assisting me in the opining, old friends of the show, my titans of tumult, Robert Weiner, Democratic strategist and columnist, also Amy Ridenhour, chairman of the National Center for Public Policy Research. Amy, let me start off with you. Secretary of Treasury Jack Lew says that not raising the debt limit would be equal to any of us not paying our credit cards. But doesn't that analogy only work if responsible citizens pay their credit cards only with other credit cards? Amy Ridenhour. Did we lose Amy?
No, I'm right here. That's a good way to put it. Also, if you were paying your credit cards in advance of the spending. Let me address a couple of things. First, Bob said during the last segment that the debt was cut in half since Obama took office. I think he meant to say the deficit. The debt has gone from about $11 trillion to $17 trillion while Obama's in office. Sadly, it is not in half. We're working on doubling it. The second thing,
and also it's expected to rise again. That's supposed to be stoking back up there. So I just wanted that learning curve to be understood. Go ahead.
Absolutely, it's rising. In terms of the deficit, it has been cut more or less in half. We have to use some numbers for this year that we're estimating about $700 billion. When Obama's first year, it was $1.4 trillion. But you contrast that, Bush's last year was $458 billion. So our great news for this year, the half number, is still a heck of a lot more than Bush's last number, and that's the deficit that adds to the debt. Now, getting back to what Jack Lew said, he is a heck of a spinner, but he's not an honest man. The bottom line is this. What the Republicans want is a deal, a real deal, not like a handshake that never happens, to cut spending going into the future, some sincere and honest entitlement reform and some other spending cuts so that we can get to the point of having a balanced budget. So we're not growing the debt. If they make that deal, I'm sure they will sign a debt limit increase in the short term. They've practically already said they will to get through next year. But they need a deal so this isn't in perpetuity. So we're literally talking about not a family refusing to pay for the things on his credit cards from last week's spending, but we're talking about a family making a pledge not to spend so much in the future, but going ahead and paying its old bills down. And that's what normal families do, and that's what any kind of sane government ought to do as well.
Bob, when you pay off your credit balances, do you do so just by using other borrowed money? And if so, would that really be the responsible way to go?
Sometimes I do balance transfers, and sometimes I pay the whole thing. However, I want to make a point, Alan, that you have mixed up authorizations versus appropriations. Appropriations, which is what we're talking about, which is what the bills of the United States are, not the authorization. Those are not bills. You've mentioned some programs that could be paid but are discretionary. The ones that are not discretionary are appropriations. Those are bills that Congress has passed, whether by CRs, continuing resolutions, or specific appropriations. Those must be paid, and no longer is there an option. If you do not pay those, that's like a person not paying their credit card bill at all, even the minimum payment, and that is what defines you as going into bankruptcy or Chapter 11, and for the country, that is the disaster that we're talking about.
But raising your credit limit does not a payment on our debt make.
If your appropriations
to
require it, you must raise the debt limit. That's what the Constitution says. There's a reason for that provision in the Constitution, and a lot of us think that Obama is nuts, not just do it de facto and not wait for the Congress, which their legislation to do it is discretionary because the president has the power.
Now, you're reading the 14th Amendment incorrectly. You are completely...
Now, a lot of people read it that way.
It only has to do with our debt. It only has to do with our actual debt, not appropriations or anything of that nature, things that we promise ourselves.
We have obligated.
There's a difference between debts already incurred versus debts that are on the horizon that are still avoidable through the repeal of legislation, which falls into the lexicon of the leverage that can be used by the House when trying to bring about a declination of overall debt for the country. You're completely mischaracterizing the 14th Amendment, and I am happy to go up against anybody when it comes to our founding document. Now, I'm looking at the time. I've already covered this ad nauseum in the 14th Amendment as it relates to this fallacious claim made by the Democrats that the president has this 14th Amendment right. I've gone over it ad nauseum, and I'm looking at the clock right now, and I've got other things I got to look at. First of all, we were talking about how the debt ceiling, not being raised would not necessarily injure the full faith and credit of the United States because only 6% of the budget, it needs to be addressed in order for that to be satisfied. $2.5 trillion coming in every year is more than enough to cover the 6%. So the assertion that we would renege on the full faith and credit of the United States is a bogus one. Whenever the president claims it, he's speaking it with his head stuck firmly in his entrails. Don't anybody believe otherwise.
Our bills as the rich guys' interest that we owe. We owe a lot more than that. We owe people their food programs and their cancer treatment.
No.
I'm using your own words. I'm using your party's own words against it. You are not reneging on the full faith and credit of the U.S. as long as we're taking care of that 6% interest on our debt. That is satisfied. Stop saying one thing as if it were the other, because it will never, ever, ever, ever be changed. You're wrong in that regard. Over and over again, Stockman had it right on that, regardless of whatever other mistakes he may have made during the Reagan administration. Now I want to get on to another fallacious contention. This has to do with the government shutdown. Politicians in the press, Bob, keep referring to the government shutdown as if most of it's actually closed, when in reality 83% of it is still open. Why, in your estimation, the unambiguous lie continuing to have so much life?
Well, I don't disagree with the fact that some things have to happen, and piecemeal they're trying to make it where only the ones that affect the poor are kept closed. That's actually what the Republicans are trying to do. So they don't want to do the food payments. They don't want to do the cancer treatments. They only want to do the other pieces that they like, that they think have universal support. Well,
the GOP were perfectly happy to open up cancer treatments. It was Harry Reid who said, no, we don't need to save these cancer kids because that would harm our overall political strategy. Pretty much his position. Amy, to you, we're hearing about how most of the federal workers are now facing dire straits, when in reality only 800,000 of the 2,800,000 have been furloughed. Now, Amy, when 2 million of 2.8 million are still working and the 800,000 in question are now guaranteed back pay, because Congress weighed in on that, where the hell lies the devastation to humanity, Amy Ridenhour?
Well, I think if you're a really hardworking person and you just can't stand to have a paid vacation, then you're suffering right now. And I don't take apart from the fact that, you know, the people who didn't know if they were going to get paid had some anxiety, but they've always been paid in the past. But the real anxiety here is the American people for whom this horrible administration has hurt their employment and their jobs. For example, the fishermen in Florida, who aren't allowed to go fishing just because Obama is having a little temper tantrum. The people who run consignment.
How about Cruz?
Obama.
Yeah, how about Cruz?
Mr. Cruz has no control whatsoever over the ocean off of Florida. Let's not lie. We are hurting real people, people who took out loans to run small businesses and now cannot run their businesses because the National Park Service is getting involved. This is it is almost an impeachable offense what he is doing.
Right.
Hurting people just
the Republicans
for
too.
fight. Fight is what this president is doing.
A vote would solve it in the House, a clean vote.
No, in that Senate.
It would solve it.
Oh, Bob, you're of the opinion that only the president and the democratically led Senate are entitled to use their constitutional checks. However, if the GOP-led House wishes to use its constitutional check, this is somehow inappropriate.